Hare Krishna, everybody. This is Krishna Dasa, and I welcome you to today's episode of Pragmatic Bhakti Sutra. So, in this podcast, we have been talking about the Narada Bhakti Sutra, and in today's episode, which is the third episode, we are going to cover Shlokas 7 to 9. Before we start, I would like to introduce a few folks who are with me in the studio. I have Kalpana Mata Ji, Maanas Prabhu, and Aayush Prabhu. Do you guys want to introduce yourself?
Hare Krishna Guruji, thank you for inviting me here.
Hare Krishna Guruji, I'm an officer cadet in the Canadian Army and I'm happy to be here.
Hare Krishna Guruji, I'm a computer science student at UBC and I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, I'm super happy to have all of you here. Thank you so much for coming here. And I look forward to your active participation. And whenever you have any questions, you can raise your hand so I know you have a question. And I'll try my best to answer it to the best of my abilities. So before we begin our session, let us say the prayer to Guru and God. Om Angyanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militamena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we start with Shloka 7. And Shloka 7 says, Sa na kamyamana nirodha rupatvat, which means, because it is of the nature of renunciation, there is no element of desire in that love divine. Now Naraji is going on to further explain the traits of bhakti. He says that in this bhakti or divine love, there are no desires. As discussed in Shloka 5, desires distract the mind and prevent us from focusing on bhakti towards God. The other aspect is, desires have no end. As Sri Krishna has explained, desires are like fire that we can never satisfy by trying to fulfill them. It is like trying to pour more oil into the fire and expecting the fire to become satisfied and stop burning. Sri Krishna warned Arjuna about this in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita. So if you look at Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse 39, Sri Krishna says, Avritam jnanam itena jnanino nitya vairina Kama rupena kaunteya dushpurenanalena cha, which means the knowledge of even the most discerning gets covered by this perpetual enemy in the form of insatiable desire, which is never satisfied and burns like fire, O son of Kunti. We should also be very careful to not tie our loyalty to either Guru or God based on them fulfilling our desires. Because otherwise, we look at them favorably only when our desires are fulfilled. And we look at them unfavorably when they are not fulfilled. And as we discussed, by the very nature, desires cannot be fulfilled. Because the moment one desire is fulfilled, another crops up. Not only that, many times when we try to fulfill a desire, that same desire comes back much stronger. Thus, fulfillment of desires cannot be a basis on which we build upon our bhakti. Looks like Maanas Prabhu has a question.
Yes, Guruji, I do have a question. I was just wondering, why do desires become stronger the more times you fulfill them? And also, why do desires give rise to more desires?
Well, you see, that is the nature of desires. They get stronger when you fulfill them. When they get strong enough, they become an addiction. This has been documented in many ancient scriptures, including the Srimad Bhagavatam. Even in modern psychology, the definition of a person with an addiction problem is given as, I'm reading the definition now. The definition says, a person with an addiction uses a substance or engages in a behavior for which the rewarding effects provide a compelling incentive to repeat the activity, despite detrimental consequences. What is the key here? The key is short-term gains. When a desire is fulfilled, it feels very good. It feels like a reward. And the next time you want more reward. You want to feel more of that short-term happiness. So you run behind it even more. When some desire gets fulfilled, we get a sense of happiness, although it is short-lived. And in fact, the problem is that it is short-lived. All material desires, no matter which desire it is, it could be that I need to have a beautiful house, or I need to have a beautiful girlfriend, or I need to have a fast car. You think about it. The happiness you get when you achieve any of these, that happiness will always be short lived. That's a fact. Now our mind then says, oh, no, you need more desires to get fulfilled because that happiness is now over. I need more happiness. So I need to go and fulfill more desires, which again is temporary. So as you can see, it's a race that you can never win. So that is why most humans, they spend their entire lives trying to fulfill various desires to keep experiencing short-term happiness, and which turns into despair very soon. See, I'll give another example. Think about people with addiction problem. What when you say addiction, I mean, it can be something like cigarette smoking is an addiction, or alcohol is an addiction. Let us think about cigarette smoking now as an example. There was a time when this person never smoked. Then there came a time when there was this urge, let us just try. So they go take a smoke. They feel a short-term happiness. After a while, that happiness goes away. But they have memory of that happiness. They think they were happy for some time. No, they want that happiness again. So now they go and take the second puff, the second cigarette. Again, that is temporary. That happiness goes away. But now the desire is stronger because they have tasted it twice now. So the third time, they go for the third cigarette faster than they went for the second. And before they know, they are smoking many cigarettes a day. And then time comes when they say they cannot live without that cigarette. Isn't that funny? Because not long ago, they were pretty okay without that cigarette. So how did they go from I'm okay without a cigarette to I cannot live without a cigarette? That is the nature of these desires. You fulfill them, the desire gets stronger. And at some point, it reaches a state of addiction. That is what an addiction is all about. An addiction is just a desire that is so strong now that you feel powerless against it. I hope that makes it clear, Maanas Prabhu.
Yes, Guruji, thank you very much.
Now, I would also like to clarify that the problem is only with material desires. We should have a desire for realizing God and achieving God's divine grace. That should be the only strong desire that we have. That is desire directed towards the right object. Okay, so looks like Aayush Prabhu also has a question here. Please go ahead, Aayush.
Thank you, Guruji. I really like the point raised regarding not tying our loyalty to God or our Guru based on them fulfilling our desires. How does this apply to relationships to other human beings, be they family or friends? And how does this change when applied to, say, a corporate environment where networking is done solely on a need basis?
See, by nature, material relationships, which include relationships made for specific purposes in a corporate environment, they are very temporary and shallow, as you have pointed out yourself. If you don't provide the expected value to the other person, they will just look for somebody else. Personal relationships, they're a little deeper. For example, you can't, or you usually don't try to replace your parents, or you don't try to replace your children just because they don't behave or act the way you want them to. So personal relationships get a little deeper. And they're also not strictly based on them meeting your expectations, because even if they disappoint you, you don't replace your parents, you don't replace your children. Whereas in corporate environment or any such shallow relationships that you spoke about, that is the norm. It is, as you rightly pointed out, the relationship is based on a need. And if the need is fulfilled, the relationship stays. If the need is not getting fulfilled, they go pick another relationship. That makes sense? Okay. Now, relationship with Guru and God is deepest. It is much deeper than even personal relationships, family relationships. And so that relationship needs to be absolute. And that relationship cannot be absolute if you base them on them fulfilling your desires, because that is the nature of a shallow relationship. Now, you cannot behave the way you behave in a shallow relationship and expect an absolute relationship. It doesn't work. So that is why, if the intent is an absolute relationship, which is what you should have with your Guru and with God, it cannot be based on them fulfilling your desires, because we just studied that desires can never be fulfilled. So it is guaranteed that at some point you are going to feel disappointed. At some point you are going to feel like some of your desire is not getting fulfilled by your guru or by God. And then your relationship, you want to change it then. You don't want to stay in that relationship. But that doesn't work that way, because it has to be an absolute relationship. I hope it makes sense.
Yes, Guruji, thank you so much for your answer.
I hope this keeps becoming more and more clear as we progress through the various shlokas of the Bhakti Sutra. So let us proceed. So as we were saying, with Guru and God, because we want an absolute relationship, that relationship cannot be based on desires being fulfilled. The best way to overcome this tendency of having more and more desires, it is by reminding ourselves and realizing that we are not our body. See, it is only our body consciousness that causes various desires. Once we understand and believe and realize that we are not the body but the soul, it becomes easier to stop this endless cycle of desires. Once we realize that we are not the body but the soul, then we will be able to understand that there is no room for desire in bhakti. Bhakti is divine love. And the nature of divine love is that it is selfless. In bhakti, we are not thinking about what we can get, but rather what we can give. Even in human love, if the love has to be successful or genuine, then even in human relationships, when you are talking about love, you are talking about what you can do for the other person. If you find yourself talking about what the other person can do for you, then that's still not love. That is just a business transaction. So in divine love, it is more of that. Divine love is all about what we can do for God. How can we serve God? What we can do for the Guru. How can we serve Guru? And as Sri Krishna has explained, we have to avoid attachment as well as aversion. In other words, because now we are studying about the need for not having desires, you shouldn't start focusing on not having desires. In other words, now you shouldn't start saying, oh, no desires, no desires, no desires, no desires. That doesn't work. Because whether you say, I want something, or whether you say, I don't want something, it is that something which is in focus. So as Krishna said, let us not have either attachment or aversion towards desires. The focus should basically be on service without any expectation. Desire departs from the heart in which devotion has entered. Such a beautiful statement. Now imagine that a person is living right on the banks of the holy river Ganga. But then, whenever he is in need of water, he goes and starts digging wells. Won't we call him an ignorant person? Because he already has access to the pure water of river Ganges. And yet he is digging well to get water. Just like that, it is only our ignorance that causes us to run behind material desires when we have ready access to the boundless divine love of God. That is why Narad Ji has said earlier that we should not even desire for liberation. He says neither mukti nor bhukti. The focus should only be on bhakti. Whenever we catch ourselves desiring for some things, we should replace those desires with the desire to serve God. Instead of thinking, how can I be happy? We should start thinking, how can I make God happy? That is how we grow in bhakti. Now here is an incident from the life of Swami Vivekananda. When as a young man, he was still known as Naren. It illustrates that bhakti itself is the check to all worldly desires. So early in 1884, Naren's father Vishwanath died of a heart attack. He had been ailing for some time. When the time came to look into Vishwanath's financial affairs, it was found that he had been spending more than he earned and had left nothing but debts. Naren set himself to find employment. He got a post in an attorney's office and he translated some books. But these were temporary jobs. They brought no real security for his mother and brothers. So now Naren decided to ask Ramakrishna to pray on his behalf that the family's money troubles might be overcome. Now Ramakrishna was a very great saint. He was the guru of Naren. Then Ramakrishna tells Naren that it is up to you. You have to pray. Why should I pray for you? You can do the prayer yourself. You should go and pray yourself. He said, just accept the existence of Divine Mother and pray for her help. Today is a special day, it is Tuesday. Just go to the temple and pray. Mother will grant whatever you ask for. So Naren was pretty happy to hear that answer. So he goes to the temple, and on the way he kind of felt a lot of excitement and ecstasy. And when he entered the temple, he saw at once that the mother actually looked alive. Naren was overwhelmed. He prostrated himself again and again before her shrine, exclaiming, "Mother, grant me discrimination, grant me detachment, grant me divine knowledge and devotion. Grant me that I may see you without any obstruction always." And Naren's heart was filled with peace. The universe completely disappeared from his consciousness, and the mother alone remained. When Naren came back from the temple, Ramakrishna asked him if he had prayed for the relief for his family, and had he prayed for the family's needs and all of that. And Naren was taken aback. He had totally forgotten to do so. Ramakrishna told him to return quickly and make the prayer. He said, "Go back to the temple and make that prayer." So Naren obeyed. But again, he got overcome with ecstasy. And again, he forgot his intention. And again, he landed up praying only for detachment, devotion, knowledge, as before. And he again goes back to the Guru, Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna says, "Oh, you are such a silly boy. Couldn't you control yourself a little and remember your prayer? Go back again and tell mother what you want. Be quick." Now, this time, Naren's experience was different. He did not forget the prayer. But when he came to the temple for the third time, he felt a sense of deep shame. What he had been planning to ask seemed miserably trivial and unworthy. It was, he said later, like being graciously received by a king and then asking for gourds and pumpkins. So once more, he asked only for detachment, devotion, and knowledge. Ramakrishna, however, blessed Naren's family, saying they will never lack food and clothing. This is a fact within the experience of any spiritual aspirant. As they come nearer to God, their heart is so filled with love and devotion that there is no room for any other desire. So it looks like at this point we have a question from Aayush Prabhu.
Thank you, Guruji. I had a little question about Naren's prayers for detachment, devotion, and divine knowledge. Doesn't this prayer count as desire? Why can't he work for these himself without asking God to give him these things?
Okay. See, as explained earlier, desires are good as long as they are directed towards God and God's divine grace and love. It is an act of humility when we pray to God and ask for God's help. See, when we are a child, don't we ask our parents for anything and everything that we want? That's because we knew that our parents love us and they take care of us and they will provide for us. No, God is like our parent. God is the divine parent. So Sri Krishna has said in the Bhagavad Gita that he is a suhridam sarva bhutanam, a selfless friend of all living entities. Thus we should approach God without any ego or pride and seek his help. There's nothing wrong in that. When we say something like, "I don't think I need to ask God, I can get it myself," that is an act of pride and ignorance. When we approach God, pride only becomes an obstruction and an impediment that prevents us from attaining his grace and love. A similar message can be found even in the Bible. If you look at Bible, Matthew 7:7, it says, "Ask and it will be given. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you." In other words, there are two parts to your question. The first part was praying for detachment, devotion, knowledge. Isn't that desire? Yes, it is desire, but that desire is good. That should be the desire we should all have. The second part of your question, why does he have to ask God for those things? Why can't he achieve these himself? Again, the answer there is the mindset. The mindset that, "Oh, I can get it myself," is the mindset of pride and arrogance. Whereas the mindset of "God help me," is a mindset where you have your pride under check and you're approaching God like a child will approach their parent. So that's the right mindset. I hope that satisfies your question, Aayush Prabhu.
Thank you, Guruji. I had a bit of a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, suppose I prayed for something relatively trivial, such as maybe I want God's help in paying off my mortgage. It is relatively trivial in comparison to, say, praying for the power of discrimination or divine knowledge. But it's still a relatively meaningful desire and a productive desire to have. In this situation, would it make sense for me to pray for these things? Or should I be trying to achieve this goal of mine, fulfill this desire of mine on my own? Is me wanting to fulfill this desire on my own still a prideful notion? Or is it still, or is it this time the right mindset to have, that I will take care of this myself? In other words, is this equivalent to asking for pumpkins from a king, or is this a valid prayer to have to God?
That's a excellent question. It's pretty deep. There are many answers. I will try to do justice to the question. So, there is nothing wrong in asking for God's help. There is nothing trivial. The context I can provide is the very popular shloka from Bhagavad Gita. Karmanye vadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala heturbhurma sangotsava karmani. So what Sri Krishna is saying there, you have the right to perform your actions, rightful actions, your duties. You don't have a right for the results. In this context, how you actually understand this is, what is not fine is you telling God, God, you take care of my EMI. I'm going to be sleeping on the couch. The right approach is, you do your duty, what you are supposed to do. And then you tell God, God, I am doing my duties to the best of my knowledge. You please help take care of the results. I need to pay my EMI. Please help me. Please help me perform my duties such that I'm able to pay my EMI. That is the right prayer. So you are not actually praying for an EMI. You are praying to God to give you the ability to do whatever you need to do to take care of that EMI. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, Guruji. Thank you for the beautiful answer.
Welcome. These are all excellent questions. I'm super happy that you are also engaged and asking me these questions. So let's proceed. Let's go to Shloka 8. Shloka 8 says, Nirodhastu Loka Veda Vyapara Nyasaha. This renunciation indeed is in the total giving up of all worldly and religious activities. So Naradji is saying that Bhakti is Nirodha Rupa, which means renouncing all the unnecessary worldly things that we care too much about and all the unnecessary Vedic rituals that we follow. If you attended my Bhagavad Gita sessions, then you may remember the topic about Moha Kalilam, where Sri Krishna had warned Arjuna that if you keep practicing these rituals for getting short-term benefits, it is like a Moha Kalilam, which is a dense forest of delusion. And it's not easy to get away from that illusionary forest. See, the word renouncing may seem very strong. However, here Naradji is talking about giving up smaller things for the sake of gaining something much bigger. See, I'll give you an example. Let's say you reach the airport in a taxi and you have a very nice cozy seat in the taxi. The taxi has AC, it has nice music, you have a nice cozy seat. You have reached the airport, but now you're so attached to the taxi seat, you don't want to get out of the taxi. Then how will you get into the airport? How will you get into the airplane? The airplane seat is probably much better than the taxi seat. The view you will get from that seat is probably a lot better than you could ever get from the taxi seat. But if you don't give up the taxi seat, how can you get into the airplane seat? That is the kind of renunciation Naradji is talking about here. Give up these petty desires. Stop running behind these small material things so that you can get that divine love. You can get that divine grace of God. Desire is the opposite of renunciation. Here is an excerpt from one of Swami Vivekananda's lectures. I really liked this lecture of Vivekananda. So I'm going to just read a couple of paragraphs from Swami Vivekananda's lecture. He says, desire is an enemy of peace. Desire is an enemy of devotion. Without renunciation, which also is termed as tyaga, bhakti can never be cultivated in the heart. Vishaya asakti, attachment to sensual enjoyments, is the obstacle in developing devotion. See, again, Vivekananda talks very scientifically. Vivekananda says that when we are attached to sensual enjoyments, there is a constant leaking of energy. Our energy leaks out. And you can never see an improvement in your spiritual sadhana, because a spiritual sadhana or spiritual practice requires a lot of energy. The devotee will always complain. They will say, I have not realized anything in the path of devotion. My mind remains the same. It is always wandering about wildly. I am restless. What is to be done, etc., etc. Desire is very powerful and it assumes various subtle forms. Desire is Maya's weapon to hurl down the jivas into the mire of samsara. There is no end to the thirst of desires. It is unquenchable. Enjoyment does not bring satisfaction of desire, just as fire cannot get satisfied by pouring more oil into it. I can see a big question in your eyes, Maanas. Prabhu, do you have a question here?
Yes, Guruji, I do have a question. I was just wondering, if desire is the enemy of peace and devotion, what if someone desires peace and devotion?
Well, that may sound contradictory, but it's not, because as explained earlier, desire is good as long as it is for God and God's grace, because that desire will lead to peace and devotion. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Shri Krishna talks about two kinds of happiness. One is termed Preya and one is termed Shreya. Preya is short-term happiness. Those are things that seem very pleasurable in the short term, but in the long term, they always turn out to be a cause of pain and misery. A great example is alcohol. When you consume alcohol, it seems like a very happy thing to do, very pleasurable thing to do. But in the long term, we all know it only causes a lot of pain and misery. So that kind of happiness is Preya. Whereas Shreya is happiness derived out of things which initially may seem uncomfortable or uninteresting, but in the long term, they give you true happiness. An example is, let us say, your teacher forcing you to maintain hygiene or forcing you to do your homework. It seems unpleasurable. It seems not cool. You don't enjoy it. But if you follow the teacher's instructions, if you comply, in the long term, it is only going to benefit you. I personally know many classmates of mine who were not too happy with their teacher when we were in school. But now, many years later, when we are all well settled in our lives, they very fondly remember their teachers. They feel thankful to them. They write letters to them saying, thank you so much for being strict with me. Because of you, I stayed on the right path. And today I am a big guy, and so on and so forth. You see what I mean? That is Shreya. So happiness itself, there is nothing wrong in trying to get happiness or in trying to be happy. There's nothing wrong in happiness. God wants you to be happy. But we have to aim for Shreya, the long-term permanent happiness. So desire for God's grace and desire for God's love is the right desire, because that eventually lands up making you or giving you long-term peace and happiness. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, Guruji, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Maanas. Prabhu, good question again. So we have to first eliminate asakti, which is attachment. Then kamana, which is longing, will die by itself. When the attraction towards external objects ceases, then there still remains the internal craving, which is called trishna, or thirsting for objects. This is the most dangerous enemy of devotion. When the attraction towards objects, external as well as internal, ceases without any veil, then you can say that you are free from trishna. The mere thought of longing that such and such thing should come to me, that is Trishna. It is the strong chain of Trishna that we should unshackle ourselves from if we want to grow in bhakti. Cut off the Trishna Tantu, the thread of sense hankering, by the sword of Vairagya. Vairagya is detachment. This is Nirodha, or control of desires, or renunciation of desires. Kalpana Mata Ji, looks like you have a question now.
Yes, Guruji. So I wanted to know what is the difference between asakti and kamana, and how can one exist without the other?
Oh, asakti or attachment leads to kamana or longing. So if there is no attachment, there cannot be any longing. So kamana cannot exist without asakti. We can eliminate attachment through discrimination and inquiry. That is the way of the Jnana Yogis, by the way. Sri Krishna has explained that the easier way of getting rid of attachment is through surrender to Him and by practice of unalloyed, ananya bhakti towards Him. That is how you get rid of asakti. And once you get rid of asakti, kamana automatically goes away. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, Guruji. But I have another question now. So following up on the previous question, what is the difference between attraction towards external objects and internal craving?
So I think the question you are actually trying to ask is, what is the difference between attractions that you exhibit externally versus attachments that remain in your mind?
Right.
Okay. For example, you may either touch someone because you feel the attraction, or you can just imagine touching that person. It is easier to control external attractions. Internal attractions or attractions and desires that stay in our mind are more difficult to manage, and they cause a lot of troubles. This is what Vivekananda ji also said in the lecture we just read, that Trishna, that internal desire, longing, is Trishna, and that is very dangerous. So as discussed in the previous question, we have to first eliminate asakti or attachment. Then the kamana will die by itself. So when attraction towards external objects ceases, then there still remains the internal craving, Trishna, and this is very dangerous enemy for anybody aspiring to grow on the spiritual path. That is why we have to constantly practice Vairagya or detachment, and we have to constantly practice devotional service. And there are techniques given in Bhakti Yoga for this, like constantly chanting the holy name of God, constantly thinking about what we can do in service of God, etc. This will help us eliminate that Trishna. See, the key to again keep in mind is, as Sri Krishna said, Sri Krishna has provided the building blocks for mind management. And the foundations are very simple, and they apply to even complex situations. For example, here, the situation seems very complex, that, okay, I have taken care of external attachments. For example, these people who call themselves sadhus, sannyasis, whatever, like, right? They kind of wear separate kind of clothes. They wear white clothes, yellow clothes, whatever. And they will go and sit in a cave in some mountain. What they are demonstrating is control of external attachment, because they are going away from society, they are going away from good food, they are going away from comfortable homes and everything. But in the cave, if they are sitting and imagining about all those pleasures, then it beats the whole point. They are definitely not growing spiritually. That is Trishna, and that is dangerous, because only you know what kind of longings you are having inside your mind. So nobody can help you from the outside. You have to help yourself. So now that we know Trishna is very dangerous, how do we get rid of Trishna? Again, go back to Krishna's fundamentals. Krishna said, no attachment and no aversion. So don't keep running behind things in your mind, and don't try to run away from things in your mind. In other words, your mind says, coffee, coffee, coffee. Now you are saying, no, no, that is not good. Now you tell your mind, no coffee, no coffee, no coffee. Doesn't work. Because at the end of the day, the object of focus is still coffee. So you cannot get rid of Krishna by saying, I'm not going to desire. So the technique given by Sri Krishna is substitution. Whenever you have a thought that is not right, whenever you have a thought that you don't think serves you well, replace that with a good thought. Replace that with a thought of God. Replace that with a thought of service to God. That is how you take care of Krishna. I hope that makes it clear, Kalpana Mata Ji.
Yes, Guruji. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's proceed. Nyasa means renunciation. This brings nirodha or control of mind. It is renunciation of the fruits of work. Renunciation of egoism is sarvatyaga, renunciation of all. All desires, selfishness, raga, dvesha, body idea, deha abhimana, they all hang on egoism. Egoism is the pivot on which all these are centered. So if we can kill egoism, then the surrender becomes complete. Even if there is a tinge or grain of egoism, the Lord will not reveal himself. As long as our hearts have desires or egoism, there is no possibility of divine grace. Maanas Prabhu, looks like you have a big question here. Go ahead.
Yes, Guruji, I do have a question. So, if divine grace is not possible for someone with desires and ego, does that mean that God does not grace someone with this help if the person has these desires and ego?
That's a very interesting question, Maanas Prabhuji. Because it reveals one of the most misunderstood concepts about God. Let me ask you a question, which probably may help explain the answer better. Okay? Now we know that air provides us with oxygen required to sustain our life. When we use our nose to breathe in and out, air provides us with the life force and helps us live. What if we choose not to breathe? Will air not provide us with the required life force then? Does air provide the required life force only to people who choose to breathe? You may think this question is not making any sense. In a way, it actually does. Because God's grace is like that life force contained in air. It is always there. It is always available to everyone. We have to make an effort to receive that grace. When we are too busy chasing material desires and too egoistic to turn towards God, we become incapable of receiving that omnipresent, omnipotent, divine grace of God. So we just have to look at it the other way. It is not who does God provide grace to and who does he not provide grace to. It is who chooses to get God's grace versus who does not choose to get God's grace. God's grace is always there. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Guruji, thank you very much.
You are most welcome. I'm super happy with these deep questions. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the ideal of renunciation must grow naturally. One must not force oneself to renounce. As he gave this example, if a man tries to remove the scab from a wound before it is completely healed, the wound will only get worse. Let the wound heal, and then the scab will dry up and fall by itself. Similarly, we must move towards God, pray for pure devotion, learn to love God, and as that love grows in our heart will automatically stop being attached to worldly affairs and materialistic pursuits. Thus, the path of devotion is the most natural and easiest to follow, because the more we progress, the more we get purified and the stronger our bhakti becomes. Once we are on the path of bhakti yoga, we need to just practice patience and perseverance with a strong faith that we can achieve Siddha Bhakti anytime. There is no minimum time requirement. And based on our intensity and purity, we can achieve success on this path any moment. Now, lokik means worldly things. People get entangled in so many worldly affairs. It is not uncommon to hear somebody say that they could not practice their yoga or meditation because they had to go attend a cultural event, or they have to go attend the wedding of their uncles, friends, cousin, blah, blah, blah. Now, Sri Krishna taught us we should perform our worldly duties without getting entangled in worldly affairs. And by using the term Vedic, Naradji is referring to the Karma Kanda, which was created for the sake of people who were very worldly minded and materialistic. The intent was to get them interested in spirituality. However, once we are already on the path of Bhakti Yoga, we no longer need those rituals. We have to rise above them. That is Sri Krishna's message to those who have surrendered to him. He says in the concluding verse of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma suchaha. Relinquishing all dharmas, take refuge in me alone. I will liberate you from all sins, grieve not. See, that should be our goal, that of renouncing all attachments to worldly and material things and surrendering completely to God. That is the way to succeed in Bhakti Yoga and attaining His divine love. With that, I think we can move on to the 9th sloka. Tasmin ananyata tad virodhi shudasinata cha. Which means, in the Lord wholehearted, single-minded devotion, and in all else that are contrary to it, complete indifference. That is the nature of renunciation or nirodha. Also translated as, a bhakta's renunciation means that his whole soul goes towards God, and whatever goes against love for God, he rejects. So Naradji is saying that in this bhakti, we have to be ananya towards our object of our worship, which is God. Ananya basically means no anya or nothing else. Our mind should be attached to God alone and nothing else. One of Sant Kabir's dohas, it says, Jab mai tha tab hari nahi, ab hari hai mai nahi. Prem gali ati sankari, jame do na samahi. Which means, when I was there, then Hari or God was not. Now Hari is and I am not. The streets of divine love are very narrow and there is no space for both to fit in. Such a beautiful doha. All he is trying to say is, as long as the space is occupied by your ego, by your I, there is no space for God. So when you get rid of that I, the small I, then you make room for the big I. This kind of ananya chintan or exclusive focused devotion to God requires constant practice, abhyasa, and detachment, vairagya. Whenever we catch our mind running here and there, we have to bring it back and fix it again and again on the form of the Lord. It takes time to train our minds like this. We should not be discouraged in the beginning. Constant and consistent practice fueled by unshakable faith will help us succeed. Remember the example of a screw. You may feel like you are turning the screw, but it's going nowhere. But with each turn, it is going a little more closer to the wall. You just should not give up. Because if you give up, the screw is left hanging in the wall and somebody is going to rip it apart. You just have to keep turning the screw with the faith and conviction that eventually it is going to attach to the wall. Just like that, when you are practicing any kind of yoga, especially Bhakti Yoga, you shouldn't give up. You should have the faith and conviction that constant practice is taking you closer to the goal. In the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Shri Krishna had said, Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanya gamina paramam purusham divyam yati partanu chintayan. With practice, O Parth, when you constantly engage the mind in remembering me, the Supreme Divine Personality, without deviating, you will certainly attain me. Now, there is a simple formula to help strengthen and purify our mind. It's called ABCD. A stands for association of pure devotees, the Satsanga. B stands for books, holy books, like Bhagavad Gita. C stands for chanting of the holy name. And D stands for dietary control. These will greatly help discipline and purify the mind. Without purifying the mind, we cannot cultivate bhakti in our heart. Now, there is a story of one of the greatest bhakti yogis of ancient times. Her name was Shabri, who received the divine grace of Lord Rama, who personally came to visit her in her ashram. Lord Rama wanted to offer her anything she wanted. So he says, Shabri, ask me for anything that you want. And Shabri says, my Lord, I only want to attain God's divine love, and I only want that knowledge of God. See, look at that. God himself is in front of Shabri, asking what she wants. She could have asked for anything that she wants. And she says, all I want is God's divine love and the knowledge of God. That is the mark of a true Bhakti yogi. Lord Rama was, needless to say, very pleased. And so his response is documented poetically in the Maanas, which was composed by Sant Tulsidas in the 16th century. Lord Rama explains the 9 types of devotion to Shabri, popularly known as Navada Bhakti. And he asks her to pay attention and imbibe these into her heart. So I will try to do justice by reading the poem of Navada Bhakti, pardon any mistakes. Pratham Bhagati Santan Kar Sanga, Dusari Rati Mam Kata Prasanga, Gurupad Pankaj Seva, Tisri Bhagati Aman, Chauthi Bhagati Mam Gun Gan, Karai Kapat Taj Gan, Mantra Jap Mam Dhrud Vishwas, Pancham Bhajan So Bed Prakas, Chat Dam Seal Birati Bahu Karma, Nirat Nirantar Sajjana Dharma, Tatav Sam Mohi Maya Jagadeka, मोते संत अधिक करी लेखा, आठव जथा लाभ संतोषा, सपनेहु नहीं देख ही पर दोषा, नवम सरल सब सन तनहीना, मम बरोस ही हर्ष न दीना, नवमहु एकहु जिनके कोई, नारी पुरुष सचराचर कोई, मम दर्शन फल परम अनुपा, जीव पाई निज सहज जरूपा, सगुन उपासक परहित निरत नीति दृढ़ नेम, ते नर प्राण समान मम जिनके द्विज पद प्रेम. Let us try to understand what this beautiful poem means. It starts with Pratham Bhakti Santan Kar Sanga. The first step towards devotion is to maintain the association of saintly people and pure devotees, also known as Sat Sangha. The best way to learn is by observation of people who lead by example. Maanas Prabhu, you said you are an officer cadet in the army. I'm sure you will agree that the best way to teach officer cadets about how a soldier has to behave is when the officer leads by example. That's the same with yoga, especially Bhakti yoga. The best way to learn devotion to God, how to be devoted, how to develop devotion, the best way is to follow somebody who is already leading by example. That is why the first message Lord Rama gives to Shabri is about Pratham Bhakti Santan Kar Sanga. Sat Sanga. Maintain association of devotees. Dusari Rati Mam Kata Prasanga. The second step is to enjoy listening to kathas or stories about the leelas and pastimes of the Lord. Now, katha is an Indian style of storytelling, and when we listen to katha, the concept is when we are listening to stories of God and leelas of God, we open our ears and let Lord enter from there to our heart and soul. And the third, Guru Pada Pankaj Seva Tisari Bhakti Aman. The third step towards devotion is to selflessly serve the Guru's lotus feet without any pride or arrogance. If a disciple is not in proximity to their Guru, they can serve the Guru by following their teachings. One who performs this selfless service without thought of reward shall attain God's grace. See, we have to keep one thing in mind. In various scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, etc., there is always this mention of we should approach the Guru without any pride. We should approach the Guru without any arrogance. See, we should understand it is not for the benefit of the Guru. When they say you should not have ego in front of the Guru, they are not trying to kind of make it easy for the Guru. It is to help you open your heart so that the teachings of the Guru will actually make an impact. Just like Maanas Prabhu asked, is God's grace available? And we said, yes, God's grace is always there. Who gets it? It depends on who is willing to accept it. Just like that, the Guru will teach. Even in your school, if you see the same teacher, the same school, the same textbooks, if there are 60 students, are all 60 students learning the same lessons? No. So what is different? It is how the student approaches the teacher. That is the main reason why so much importance is given to approach a Guru with respect, without any ego. Chauthi Bhakti Mama gun gan karai karat tajigan. The fourth step towards devotion is to earnestly praise Lord's virtues with a heart which is clear from all shrewdness, fraud, and cunningness. See, being cunning interrupts your spiritual progress. An innocent heart is the key to divine blessings. A pure heart can spread love and peace in the world. Mantra jap mam drid vishwas, pancham bhajan so ved prakasha. Vedas reveal that chanting Lord's name with steadfast faith is the fifth step towards devotion. Just chanting the name is not sufficient. Faith is important. That is what gives us inner strength. Chat dam seal birati bahu karma, nirat nirantar sajjana dharma. Always performing duties like a devoted religious person and practicing self-control, good character, and detachment from manifold activities. That is the sixth step towards devotion. Regular prayers and meditation are essential to discipline and purify our mind. Satav sam mohi mahe jag deka, mote sant adik kari leka. Perceiving the world as God Himself and regarding the saints higher than the Lord is the seventh step towards devotion. Lord Rama emphasizes that if human beings perceive the world as God, then they will not harm others and harmony will prevail. Moreover, if human beings will listen and follow to what the saints preach, then there will be peace, love, and compassion all around the world. Antav jatallab santosha, sapnehu nahi dekhe paradosha. The eighth step towards devotion is a stage where a person has no desires left and is content with whatever they have. And they don't see fault in others, even in their dreams. We should not see ourselves superior to other human beings. If we find fault in others, we are at a serious risk of limiting our own happiness. And because of this, we cannot make this world a happy place. Navam saral sab sun chal hina, mam baros hiye harsh nadina. The ninth point is to have full faith in the Lord and become childlike innocent with no deception. The immovable faith in Lord leads to a stage which has no room for depression during failures or ecstasy during success. We can then remain calm in all situations. And this helps us think logically and make decisions wisely. Then Sri Ram concludes his message by saying, whoever possesses these 9 forms of devotion, regardless of whether they are man, woman, or any other creature, they are very dear to me. O good lady, as for yourself, you are blessed with unflinching devotion of all these types. The prize that is rarely won by great yogis is within your easy reach today. And then Lord Rama says that the most incomparable fruit of seeing me is that the soul attains its natural state of union with God. It's a very profound statement. So, we have heard about a lot of the stories about saints in the past who would do tapasya and they would request God to show themselves. They are like, give me darshan of God. So why do these saints want darshan of God? Because Lord Rama says that when God actually reveals their form, the very sight of that form is enough to liberate your soul and unite it with God. It's so profound, right? So in the 9th shloka of the Narad Bhakti Sutra, Narad Ji then says, Tad virodhi sudasinata. You become neutral or indifferent to those things that are detrimental to bhakti. When we are on the path of bhakti yoga, we will face many hurdles and difficulties and even oppositions. As discussed in the previous shloka, we don't try to confront everybody who is creating hurdles on our path. Instead, we ignore and become indifferent and neutral to such issues. That will help us focus our energies on making progress in the path of bhakti yoga. Shri Krishna has said this in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So in shloka 12.16, Krishna says that those who are indifferent to worldly gains, externally and internally pure, skillful, without cares, untroubled, and free from selfishness in all undertakings, such devotees of mine are very dear to me. I am quoting this verse because in that shloka, Shri Krishna uses the term udasino gatavyata. So he uses the term udasino, this similar word that Narad Ji has used in the 9th shloka. So udasinata is a state of mind. It comes through viveka and vairagya. It doesn't mean we become a renunciate or sannyasi physically. Swami Vivekananda gives a funny example of a sannyasi who is leading the life of a beggar in the forest, but then he's attached to his walking stick and begging bowl. So he's not really in the required state of mind. Whereas King Janaka, he was ruling over a large and prosperous kingdom But he was not attached to anything. Vivekananda says he is a perfect yogi who was unattached to anything. He had the perfect state of mind. So what it means is it does not matter what your material situation is, because what is required is the right state of mind, which is an inside job. That will be further explained by Narad Ji, the next two shlokas. So I see that I think Kalpana Mata Ji and Aayush Prabhu also have questions. So let's go ahead, take a couple more questions.
Yes, Guruji. So I have a question here. How can we love God unconditionally and also have a one-pointed focus and faith in Him at the same time? And how might we apply this in our relationships with human beings?
See, we define God as someone who owns everything, who knows everything, etc. There is nothing that God doesn't already have. In other words, God doesn't have any selfish needs from humans. That should help us understand that God's love for us is unconditional. It is eternal, ever present. So once we realize this, then it becomes easy to love God unconditionally. See, if you look, there is another way to look at it, is our unconditional love is the only thing that God seeks from us. It is also the only thing that we can truly give God. What else can you give God? Because everything already belongs to God. It is a privilege to have this opportunity, and very fortunate are those people who realize this and utilize this opportunity to actually give God something. You are giving God something. Isn't that a privilege, honor, and an opportunity? The God who owns infinite universes, who has no scarcity of anything, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, you are giving this God something. What a privilege, what an honor. And what is that one thing you truly can give? Is your unconditional love. That is the whole reason why God gave us free will. That free will lets you give something to God. Without that free will, there is nothing you can give God. So once you understand this, then you will realize that giving God unconditional love is your privilege, your honor. I hope that makes sense. Now, how do we apply this to human beings? To be very honest, you can't have such divine love for humans, because humans are not truly capable of unconditional love, because humans always need something. They are always in need. With humans, we shouldn't be thinking about divine love. With humans, we should only be thinking about selfless love, which is also very difficult. But how do we apply it to human relationship is, as we discussed earlier, we should focus more on what we can give rather than what we can receive. If we can be in that mindset, then that's a successful love story. If you are always focusing on what the other person can give us, how the other person can make us feel happy, how the other person can satisfy us, that is where troubles happen. That is where we are not able to experience real love. The only caveat is we need to be sure that we are practicing selfless love with the right person, because that is where we have to use your viveka, your discrimination. Your intellect is helpful there. The intellect has to be used to identify and verify that you are dealing with the right person. After that, you can keep the intellect away and just practice selfless love, where it is not based on you receiving something, but it is always about you giving something. Then that relationship will definitely be a happy, long-lasting relationship. I hope this makes sense, Kalpana Mata Ji.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think Aayush Prabhu has another question.
Yes, Guruji. I'm a little confused about the notion of making the world a better place without focusing on the faults or being judgmental. Because, as we all know, the first step to solving a problem is acknowledging that there is a problem. So, in that sense, how can we make the world a better place without focusing or acknowledging the faults in it or being judgmental of it?
Nice question, Aayush Prabhu, but I think your question also has the answer in it. The point to understand, okay, let me repeat your question. You said, how can we make the world a better place without focusing on the faults or being judgmental? So you are asking, how can I make the world a better place if I'm not judgmental? So, but then you also spoke about problems. So the point to understand is that we judge people, not problems. We never judge a problem. We are always judging the person. So if we learn to focus on the problem instead of the person, then you will not be judgmental, and we will be able to provide meaningful solutions that benefit everybody. So that is the key. Key is to always focus only on the problem and not on the person. Because the moment we focus, so instead of saying something like, you say, let us say you just come across a person who is stealing a loaf of bread. Now you have two options. Option one, just shout and say, thief, he's a thief. He's stealing, so he's a thief. No, that is judgmental. You are making a judgment that that person is a thief. What are you going to solve here? You are going to maybe take away that person, but then tomorrow another person will come and steal that same loaf of bread. But if you focus on the problem, why does a person feel the need to steal a cheap loaf of bread? Which means there is poverty, there is hunger, there is inequality. That is what is causing somebody to take such risks. They are not stealing a diamond, they are not stealing anything very precious. They are stealing a piece of bread to fill their stomach and feed their family. If you learn to think that way, you may actually solve the problem so that such stealings don't happen in future. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, Guruji. I really liked how you explained that judgment is always on the person and not the problem. That made things very clear. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Aayush Prabhu. Is there any other last question you had?
Yes, Guruji. So, on the point about the beggar being attached to his walking stick and his bowl for food, I was wondering, how can one take care of his basic necessities without being attached or overly dependent on them?
Good question again. So, Aayush Prabhu, I know that you are currently a university student living in a dorm or a hostel. Now, I guess you bought a fan to keep you cool during summers.
Yes.
I guess you also bought a heater to keep you warm during winters.
Yes.
Okay. And I guess you also use the closet in your room to keep your clothes and shoes neatly. You may even have bought a room freshener to keep your room smelling good.
Regularly.
Awesome. See, now these are all taking care of your needs. There is absolutely nothing wrong with any of this. However, once you complete your education, if you refuse to move out of your room, or if you refuse to unplug the heater or the fan, because you just love the room and you love seeing those appliances in those locations, then that is attachment, then that's the problem. As long as you were taking care of your needs, it was all well and pleasant. But when you got into attachment, that is when the trouble starts. I hope that makes it clear.
Yes, that made it very clear. Thank you very much.
Most welcome, Aayush Prabhu. And also, I think we can conclude our podcast for today. So thank you, Kalpana Mata Ji. Thank you, Maanas Prabhu as well. It's been a pleasure. And these were really good, deep questions. I hope I was able to answer them to the best of my abilities. So this is Krishnadasa, and I also am very thankful and grateful to all of you who are listening to this podcast. I hope you derive meaning and benefit out of this. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me through the contact